Disney has been accused of mismanaging a few different brands they've acquired over the years, with Star Wars often being cited as the worst example among them. But in truth, there is another franchise bought by Disney that's been handled even worse than Star Wars, and that would have to be the Muppets franchise. What was once one of the most popular and recognizable names out there, the Muppets have been rendered to little more than a gimmick used by Disney to make a quick buck, usually through advertising. And today, I'd like to go over how exactly this happened. How is it possible that a franchise as iconic and beloved as the Muppets could have such a nasty downward spiral? And there might be minor spoilers ahead for one or two of the movies brought up. So in case you're dead set on having nothing ruined about any of them, you might just want to be careful. Alright, so before we can go over how exactly the Muppets fell, we must first take a look at how they rose to prominence. Now, most of the cast of the Muppets were created in 1976 for The Muppet Show, though Kermit the Frog and a few other incidental characters had already been created, either for Sesame Street or even earlier. Now, what's interesting about The Muppet Show is that it came about because Jim Henson wanted the art of puppetry to be taken seriously by adults, as most people had come to associate it with little children due to how much they were featured on Sesame Street and other preschool shows. And after discovering that adults in Europe took puppeteering much more seriously, Jim Henson, along with Frank Oz and several other puppeteers, went to England and created a puppet-based variety show that was intended for all ages, which ended up being The Muppet Show. And though people in Europe loved it, in America it was still viewed as more of a children's show, but a good and enjoyable one nonetheless. But after proving wildly successful, The Muppet Show ended up getting a movie, aptly titled The Muppet Movie, which details approximately how the Muppet characters got together. And not only did everybody love it, with the movie getting instant critical praise from pretty much everybody across the board, but it also became the gold standard for all future Muppet movies to live up to. And you have to admit, any movie to release a song as iconic as The Rainbow Connection has got to be good, right? So after a sequel, The Great Muppet Caper, was released, and The Muppet Show itself continued to go strong until it was cancelled in 1982. Then in 1984, another Muppet movie was released, The Muppets Take Manhattan, which ended up launching the Muppet Babies spin-off brand. Now after that, the Muppets slowed down for a little while. Though they still continue to appear in stuff, their days of having movies and TV shows were put on hold, with the biggest thing they got usually being TV specials. Now, towards the end of the 1980s, Disney approached Jim Henson about buying the Muppet brand, which was something that Jim Henson was interested in doing. The only problem was that both sides proved to be pretty stubborn in negotiations, with Jim Henson refusing to sell until certain requests of his were met. And finally, in May of 1990, Disney agreed to Henson's terms, and they were all set to buy the franchise. But then another slight complication popped up. Jim Henson died. Literally 2 days before he was to sign over the Muppets to Disney, Jim Henson died suddenly. And with him gone, Disney defaulted back to their original terms to buy the Muppets, which his children refused to do out of respect for their father. So, with neither side once again willing to cave, the whole deal ended up falling apart. But with that, Brian Henson, son of Jim Henson, was determined to keep the Muppet brand alive, and did so by almost immediately putting into production an adaptation of A Christmas Carol starring Michael Caine and the Muppets, with puppeteer Steve Whitmire taking over as Kermit the Frog at Jim Henson's own posthumous request. Because the thing was, Jim Henson believed that the Muppet characters were more than just puppets made of fabric. He believed they were real, breathing characters that should be around long after the people who originated them were gone. And as a result, his son was determined to see that's what they did. Though, considering the things to come, maybe Frank Oz was right to say that he didn't quite agree with Jim Henson on that. But either way, The Muppet Christmas Carol proved to be a huge success, and not only proved that the Muppets did indeed have staying power, but is also credited with relaunching the career of Michael Caine. So with that, 2 more Muppet movies and a short-lived Muppet nighttime show were created throughout the rest of the decade. But by the year 2000, negotiations started up with Disney again, who were still determined to get their hands on the brand. So during this time, the Muppets were mostly relegated once more to TV specials and TV movies, but their presence was still felt by general audiences. Then in 2004, Disney finally once again caved on some of their demands, and their long-awaited dream to become the owners of the Muppet franchise finally came true. The only problem was, it was kind of obvious from the start that they didn't really know what to do with it. They just bounced them around in a couple of things, but otherwise didn't really use them much. It wasn't until Jason Segel approached Disney and told them that he wanted to make a movie that would bring the Muppets back to prominence, which caught Disney a bit off guard, as they assumed he would want to do a more adult spin on the Muppets, and were even more surprised when he told them that he unironically wanted to make a Muppet movie, simply because he was a fan of the franchise. And the results made it look, for a single instant, that the Muppets were back and headed into a new golden age. The movie proved to be a beautiful ode to a beloved franchise, and many fans, old and new alike, loved it. But even here, the cracks already started to show, because while Frank Oz had nothing against the movie, he also said it was too safe, and refused the offer to be involved due to Fozzie's fart shoes gag, as well as Steve Whitmire being so upset by one version of the ending, which would have seen Tex Richmond actually turn out to be Kermit in disguise as a plan to get the Muppets back together, that he said he wanted his name taken off the movie if that was the version they went with. And Kevin Clash also noted that some of the other puppeteers actually felt similar to Frank Oz and Whitmire, that it was good, but didn't feel quite right. And then audiences felt things went off the rails when Muppets Most Wanted was released, which was a direct follow-up to the previous movie without Segel's involvement, and it ended up flopping at the box office. Now, while there is debate over if the movie is actually bad, there's no denying that it was clearly not what audiences wanted from the Muppets. So trying something different, Disney decided to give them a new TV show instead. One that Frank Oz hated so much, he actually said Jim Henson was rolling over in his grave after seeing it. And then the final nail in the coffin came when they fired Steve Whitmire as Kermit the Frog. After that, the Muppets have been in nor done anything of note since. And if I can just inject my own opinion in here for a second, it was when they fired Whitmire that I believe the Muppets lost their magic. Because simply put, unless one of them did something truly horrible, that's not something Jim Henson would have ever done. He was very famous for going out of his way to take care of his fellow puppeteers and did everything he could for them. They were like a second family to him. So the fact that Disney would just arbitrarily fire his hand-picked replacement for his most iconic character feels extremely disingenuous and a prime example of a once-beloved brand going completely soulless and corporate. Especially because they couldn't even give a good reason for firing him beyond vague claims of erratic behavior. And it's like, this is Disney we're talking about. If they wanted a reason to fire somebody, they could find one. And that's the best they could come up with? I'm sorry, but the whole thing has just never sat right with me. Because it's evident, at least in my opinion, that Whitmire cared about the characters and wasn't afraid to say when he thought they were being done a disservice. And if that's the actual reason why he was fired, then I'm sorry, but that just makes the whole thing even more unforgivable. But then again, I wasn't there. One can speculate all day long, but the truth is that we probably won't really know what went down until 40 or 50 years down the road. But either way, these days the Muppets have fallen into pretty much the deepest recesses of pop culture, and are mostly used by Disney as a cheap way to sell things they want to promote. In less than 10 years, Disney managed to take a beloved brand and condemn it to complete irrelevance, and it all seemed to come from them not knowing or understanding what to do with it from the very start. Because it's really obvious that they never fully understood what to do with the brand, and every passing decision they made, with the exception of letting Jason Segel, a man who did at least somewhat understand them, only further proved that. In fact, when you really look at it, the demise of the Muppets on Disney's watch seems very much like a precursor to similar decisions they would make and the ensuing consequences that would follow with other brands they would buy, and most notably Star Wars, whose pattern is actually eerily similar to the Muppets, at least when they first bought it. Now listen, as I've said in many other videos, I actually like Disney. I want to see them succeed. Hate me if you want to for it, but I am a Disney fan and am not willing to give up on them yet. But at the same time, I'm also not going to ignore when they blatantly mismanage brands that are very close to people's hearts, and the Muppets might just be the worst victim of all. Especially because they not only clearly had no idea what to do with it, but didn't even try to hide the fact that the franchise had gone completely corporate with the last few decisions they made regarding them, specifically the firing of Steve Whitmire and turning them into glorified commercial characters. In fact, the former reason is why I myself will never watch any future projects having to do with the Muppets, unless Disney can provide a genuine reason why they let the man go. Then I can only be left to assume what I mentioned earlier is true. And I'm sorry, but I can't support a franchise that has fallen that low in terms of integrity. But that's me. The point is, decades down the line, people might just look back on the downfall of the Muppets as one of the worst examples of a corporation misusing a beloved brand to the point that it ends up being a complete liability in all of entertainment history. Okay, I think I've spoken my piece for long enough. And sorry if I got a little strange in places, but if you haven't guessed, Disney's treatment of Steve Whitmire really ticks me off, and I kind of wanted to make that fact known. But for the moment anyway, I digress, and would instead like to hear what you guys think. Do you believe that the Muppets should have been handled better by Disney, or do you believe that their falling into irrelevance was inevitable? Whatever you think, please let me know in the comments below. And you most definitely do not have to agree with any opinions expressed in this video if you don't want to. You can feel however you want to about the Muppets and how Disney handled them. And if you think I've got it all wrong, you're absolutely free to. And thank you all for watching. It is all very much appreciated. And I hope to see you all next time.